And thank you once again for joining our conversation, and to all our educators, current and retired, and those who would have even done a stunt in teaching, happy Teachers' Day. So for our conversation today, we will look at the church and abortion. Now, before we begin, let me remind you rather, of the objectives of conversations around the diocese. And it is to provide a forum where people are open to conversation. They have open conversations about pertinent issues. It is where we help people to navigate certain topics in the world from a theologically and scripturally informed perspective, and we also help people to pray aright. And so our conversation this evening takes us to discussing the church and abortion. Our panelists this evening is quite a lineup, an interesting lineup. And to start off the introductions, we will begin with the Most Reverend Howard Gregory, who was consecrated as the 14th Bishop of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. Archbishop Howard is the third Jamaican-born diocesan bishop to be elected as Archbishop the Global Fund Board. Good evening, Dr. Gomes, and welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Great. Our other panelist is Reverend Mary Graham, and she became the first priest from the Cayman Islands. Such it is with technology, but we continue. Thank you so much for your patience.
We press on in this virtual space.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. We're saying at 8 weeks old.
From fertilization till 8 weeks, the growing ball of cells is known as an embryo, and it's called a fetus from 8 to 40 weeks of gestation. And just to tell you what we're dealing with, at 3 weeks of age, what we have is a ball of cells, 3 weeks post-fertilization. At 6 weeks post-fertilization, what we have is something that's less than 1/4 of an inch long, which is smaller than a rice grain, with only primitive fish-like features and no fully formed organs. 8 weeks post-fertilization, what we're talking about, the fetus, the embryo, is 1 inch long and weighs about 1/30th of an ounce. Its head is out of proportion with its body, and not all the organs are formed yet. At 12 weeks of age, all the organs are formed, but they're not fully functional as they need to continue to develop. The fetus is then about 4 inches long, which is less usually than somebody's middle finger, and weighs about 1 ounce. The risk of spontaneous abortion is about 30% of pregnancies result in spontaneous abortion. That's without anybody doing anything at all, within 3 weeks of conception. The risk of spontaneous abortion remains above 10% until after 6 weeks of pregnancy. And it only drops to about 1% at 12 weeks of pregnancy. Until 23 completed weeks of pregnancy, the fetus has no chance of survival outside of the uterus because critical organs such as lungs are incapable of functioning normally. Induced abortions have been with us for the entirety of recorded human history. Records of abortions and techniques for inducing them can be found from as far back as 5,000 years ago in China, where they kept meticulous records of the number of abortions performed on royal concubines. In his Theaticus, Plato mentions the becoming midwife's right to induce abortion in the early stages of pregnancy. Hippocrates writes of advising a prostitute who became pregnant to jump up and down, touching her buttocks with her heels at each leap so as to induce miscarriage. Other writings attributed to Hippocrates describe instruments fashioned to dilate the cervix and curate the inside of the uterus. Long before any arguments were raised in our part of the world, women in slavery knew the bush herbs to boil to induce abortion, rather than have children to be sold into slavery. Long after slavery was abolished, many Caribbean women were still resorting to bush teas to induce abortion for contraceptive purposes. And it is this aspect that is at the root of the issue in our environment, abortion as contraception. The incidence and reasons for induced abortion vary regionally. It's been estimated that approximately 46 million abortions are performed worldwide every year. The world ratio is 26 induced abortions per 100 known pregnancies. 1% of women in a 2004 survey-based US study became pregnant as a result of rape, and 0.5% as a result of incest. Another American study in 2002 concluded that 54% of women who had an abortion were using a form of contraception at the time of becoming pregnant. Inconsistent use was reported by 49% of those using condoms and 76% of those using the combined oral contraceptive pill. 42% of those using condoms reported failure through slippage or breakage. Unsafe abortion remains a public health concern today due to the higher incidence and severity of its associated complications, such as incomplete abortion, sepsis, hemorrhage, and damage to internal organs. WHO estimates that 19 million unsafe abortions occur around the world annually, and that 68,000 of these result in a woman's death. Complications of unsafe abortion are said to account globally for approximately 13% of all maternal mortalities, with regional estimates including 12% in Asia, 25% of maternal mortality in Latin America, and 13% in sub-Saharan Africa. The few studies done in Jamaica suggest strongly that unsafe abortion is a phenomenon largely confined to the lower socioeconomic class. And I make a distinction here about unsafe abortion. It is a reality that the persons from the middle and upper classes who desire to abort an unwanted pregnancy have access to safe abortions, either locally or in the United States. Persons without the financial resources to access safe abortions, either locally or overseas, and who are determined to end an unwanted pregnancy, are forced to resort to unsafe practices which result in serious morbidity and on occasion, death. And these unsafe abortions result in significant costs to the public health system. This is the realities that inform the work of the Abortion Policy Review Advisory Group in 2008. I think they provided their first report. In both public and private debate, arguments presented in favor of or against abortion focus on either the moral permissibility of an induced abortion or justification of laws permitting or restricting abortion. Arguments on morality and legality tend to collide and combine, complicating the issue at hand. While many persons in the debate are willing to support early, first trimester, first 3 months abortion, support for termination of pregnancy declines with increasing gestational age. And there was an interesting paper done out of the University of Kent, where the author, Dr. Ellie Lee, wrote, under British law, the shift of concern as pregnancy progresses away from the woman and towards the fetus is in fact already formalized. Fetal viability is accepted as a criteria by which the legality or illegality of abortion is determined. The criteria of fetal viability thus introduces an ethical distinction in abortion law between second and third trimester abortions, which is essentially fetus-centered. The circumstances of the fetus are allowed to take priority over the circumstances of the woman. And they go on to talk about one of the reasons why it's unethical for late abortion to be restricted is because it undermines the principle of bodily autonomy, now accepted in medical law, that states that no man or woman should be forced to undergo medical procedures against their will. It is in this light problematic that a woman should remain pregnant and undergo childbirth, out of an obligation to maintain the life of the fetus. It is in fact an obligation we do not impose even in respect of born children. There is no law that can obligate a person to undergo medical treatment in order to save the life of another person. And now to the Jamaican debate. And Bishop Gregory, I'm now going to quote you, Archbishop Gregory, because I found your wisdom in 2008 very useful as I thought about this. And you wrote, and at that time in the Sunday Observer, the position advanced by the Abortion Policy Review Group is being interpreted as one which advocates abortion on demand. Even if that is the position of the review group, it is the case that the issue boils down to abortion on demand or no legal abortion under any circumstances. You went on to say, while many Christians will support a position which rejects a simple legalization of abortion on demand, the Christian community is subject to a parting of the ways when the options are reduced to a situation of all or nothing. And I'd like to use your words, Archbishop, to frame my personal position on reform of the abortion law in Jamaica. I'm a woman, a doctor by training, and I like to think both a deeply spiritual person and a tolerant realist. I'm also a wife and a mother of 4 beautiful, wise, and all grown-up children. I have 3 amazing grandchildren. Abortion has always been, it is and will always be a deeply wrenching and emotional choice for women. No woman that I have met had an abortion lightly, with blithe disregard for the meaning and consequences of the act which she is undertaking. It is not a choice which I could make in the context of my comfortable middle-class life in a committed, loving relationship for the past 40 years. However, my life is not the life of countless thousands of other women. My life is not the life of a terrified 16-year-old unable to explain to her parents that the boy that they forbade her to see has gotten her pregnant. My life is not the life of a 14-year-old whose stepfather has been raping her since she was 11 and whose mother beats her every time she tries to tell her what is happening. My life is not that of the 36-year-old mother of 3, all for one man who is the main support for the family, whose common law husband has gone to do farm work in the US and disappeared off the face of the earth, leaving her pregnant with her 4th child. My life, thankfully, has a kinder course than that of the 15-year-old girl whose hand I held as she died of sepsis from an unsafe abortion in the ward in Trinidad, where I used to work. I held her hand not because I was particularly caring, but because she was dying alone, her mother having abandoned her when she realized what was wrong with her. What I remember most about that abortion ward at the hospital in Port of Spain was the smell, the reek of rotting flesh on a still living human being. I share all of this to say that other people face different choices than I do, than you do, than each of us in this virtual space faces. I entirely understand and support the right of a woman who is raped to choose to have the baby and even to learn to love the child. I absolutely salute her courage, but her choice cannot and should not determine my choice or your choice. And so my position is that of the advisory committee. Jamaica needs to face the age-old reality that women will seek to have abortions for many, many, many reasons, which have to do with the circumstances of their lives. That the choice is painful and scary for most women, if not all. That the reality of Jamaica right now is that women in the middle and upper classes have access to safe abortions which don't mutilate or kill them, and that women in the lower socioeconomic classes don't. That the government has a responsibility to level the playing field for all its citizens. And the best way to do this is to state in law the conditions under which medical termination of pregnancy will be lawful. From the Barbadian Nation newspaper as my final thought, they said, and I quote, "It makes more sense for women to have facilities at their disposal for abortions to be done after proper counseling and under proper medical supervision than in the back street environment." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gomes, for starting us off on such a oh, it's quite riveting. It's almost as if you took us from inception, right, to birth, from six weeks, bringing into the space the matter of affordability based on class, the issue of your bodily autonomy, legality versus morality, all of those matters, the context within which a person, a woman rather, finds herself, and the choice to do the abortion or to keep the child. Archbishop, Your Grace? I think I need to gather myself a little and then come back into the space. We invite you to put your thoughts in the conversation.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Gomes. And you quoted me correctly, and we share more, I think a lot in common in terms of some of our thinking. I would say though that the basis from which I begin, and I'm sure why later on, is from a theological perspective in terms of our understanding of the human person and the value of human life. And it's the conversation has tended to be restricted to around the fetus. And that's where the value of human life is normally articulated. But we need to see it in the context of what you're talking about in relation to the persons who's pregnant and the situations and context within which they get pregnant. And the value of their life becomes a part of the conversation, particularly when you're talking about the children who become pregnant under certain circumstances. One of the ways in which we talk about the human being as being created in the image of God, the value of the human being. And in the New Testament, there's a concept also as the body as the very temple of God, the sacredness of it, and what happens in some of the situations which some persons face, and I think primarily of children, the girls, is what I see. That the violation has been spoken in terms of I'm trying to remember the theological term that was used, but it is like a theological violation of the person that has taken place. And you then have to look at the value of that life and to look at the value of how you arrive at some of those decisions, because you're talking about the violation of and the weighing of different, what weight do you give in considering whether an abortion takes place or not. Over the last couple of weeks, we have seen a number of situations really of girls being violated in the worst possible way. The most recent one, it was buggery, but it could have been the other way around, and they become pregnant. Do you force those persons? Do you say that those persons have to have a child, or do you say that they have been so violated that you are weighing the situation and determining what is to happen because of the value, not just of the fetus, but the value of a life which you have before you that has been so violated. There are some concerns which I have. I believe that, and you mentioned the Barbados, I agree there. I think the conversation has to be an interdisciplinary conversation. It must involve the medical profession, it must involve the social worker and those who counsel, it must involve the woman as well, and of course law comes into play. And I say this because one of my experiences in graduate school back in the 70s was to have the medical staff from a program in Washington, D.C. called Preterm come and lecture to us. And they were sharing what happened in that program. It's a program where abortions were readily available, and how they deal with the women who come because they are looking towards having an abortion, and how it is structured along a process which involves interacting with professionals. Some, after that interaction, decide that they will reconsider. Things that arise, for example, some wanted to be told what is the gender of the fetus. Some wanted to ask that the fetus be baptized. So there are some issues which need to be addressed in that interdisciplinary engagement, even if, although the law may say this is possible, that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
And which I think, in terms of just saying every woman has the right, it has, I think of it in terms of the law indicating, and I think this is the Barbados situation that you cited. The law permits, but the law still has to offer some guidance as to the circumstances and conditions. And if it puts in place that kind of process by which the person is carefully counseled, receiving the best that all of these persons have to offer. And I believe also, as we as a country address the issue of abortion, it must also be an interdisciplinary engagement and not just who can shout louder than the other. I would say that the search to have a law that captures it all in terms of a right, I have a challenge with some of that. And the Capri presentation did raise some of that issue recently when it talked about the children being allowed the abortion without any consent, any involvement of their parents. Because I think we're sort of looking as a society at the outcome. What is it that would make a child be pregnant and parents not know, parents not being a part of that conversation, or as the child would say, may want to kill me if the mother finds out. Something has to be wrong with that kind of situation, and it is something that we need to address. At the same time, I believe as a society, we must also address those areas of education that prepares youngsters for dealing with issues of sexuality, so that they do not find themselves into certain situations. And yes, the option for adoption and other things must be available there, but there may be strategies, mitigating strategies which we utilize as a society, so that we are satisfied that in the long run, we are dealing with the situation responsibly. Those are some of the things that I would lift up at this particular point in time. The medical profession has at times to deal with some decisions. If there is to be transplants, or if there is to be trying to remember the term now, that let's even take the Indian situation where the oxygen is in short supply. You have to make some judgment at a point in terms of who gets on and who doesn't. I believe that there are situations in which a decision has to be taken in terms of the life of the mother, the fetus, and we can't avoid those situations. So it's not just a question of whether there's abortion or no abortion. Our situations also have to be a factor taken into consideration in determining how we address situations where abortion comes to the table, and how you frame that in terms of a law which takes into consideration those various situations, I believe is something we need to continue to discuss as a society. I think I want to stop there.
Okay, Your Grace, thank you. I think, well, it's only a pause, not a stop, but just a pause. But I like that you put into the space something that we have to consider. And Dr. Gomes, I would just want to, hear what you have to say on it as well, because Bishop, I believe you said there needs to be a conversation. When you were studying, you had the opportunity to view the matter from varying perspectives. And then you mentioned the conversation that has to take place between the social worker, the medical personnel, and indeed the woman, because she's a primary element in all of this. But then you also mentioned the interdisciplinary engagement. And this is where I want to bring Dr. Gomes in, because when you talk about the interdisciplinary engagement that is indeed necessary, I'm thinking of, as Dr. Gomes mentioned, the culture of the culture of the woman, the way in which she was raised, the society, the side of the society in which she has lived, the economy, all of that. How do we handle or approach that conflict? Because I'm thinking of morality versus legality. How do we work with the woman in coming to making that conscious decision, and how do we get the lawmakers to see it from that perspective? Is it just situational?
I think there is always an element of situational, because every single human being is different, and every single human being lives and exists in a different situation. From even brothers and sisters live in different situations from each other because of their own innate personalities, because of a lot of things. And as a medical practitioner for 20 odd years of my life, you have to learn to tussle with different things. And sometimes questions of morality, you want to ask whose morality. I came bump against that in dealing with a child when I was in hospital in Palestine. And I'm going to take it a little way out from abortion and take it into other difficult questions. And the parents were Jehovah's Witnesses. And the child had a very simple bleeding disorder. It wasn't a permanent bleeding disorder. It was in response to something that had come into her environment. And she simply needed a transfusion, possibly a second transfusion, and that would have saved her life. But the parents were convinced that if I did that, she would lose her soul. And I didn't have any recourse. So their morality is very, very, very different from mine. Their religious beliefs, but they had the right to make that choice for their child. You see over and over again, I did pediatrics, I did newborn, neonatal work, and I deeply love it. And I've actually written my agony into poetry. But there were times when there were children who, for no good reason, babies born, that just did not survive, no matter what you did for them. And others that, given the circumstances of what happened at the time of their birth or the challenges the mother had health-wise, should really have died. But they sat and they fought 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 until they lived. And one of the choices we had, babies under a certain gestation of age,
right,
could not be offered ventilatory support because we had limited ventilators. And if we gave that ventilator to a child that we knew was going to use it for at least 4 to 6 weeks, we would lose the opportunity to offer that ventilator to
someone else.
Not one. Numbers of children.
Wow.
And so there was a policy that babies that came to the unit with their eyes fused, which meant they were under 23 weeks of age, were not offered ventilation, because that would mean the death for 6 or 8 other babies that could have been saved by that ventilator while they fought and most likely didn't live. These are hard choices, and they always require counseling. They always require an interdisciplinary approach. They always require support for the medical professionals that you're asking to assist in these decisions, for the parents that have to be brought into these decisions. But at the end of time, there are choices that we can help people to make. And let's get back to abortion. I absolutely agree with you. I think it must require, even if the counseling simply consists of a conversation with a trusted doctor, priest,
social worker.
Social worker. If we can't even bring the interdisciplinary into it, then we bring in, I really think it's a woman should have that opportunity to talk through her decision. But at the end of time, I believe that people have the right to make that decision when they're making a choice about their own lives. And here we're not talking children who have been raped. That's a completely different.
That's a whole different thing.
That's
We're talking about a woman who would have
an adult woman
who would, decide to keep or not to keep.
Would know what her life is and what that decision means for her. And remember, the pregnancy is also very dangerous for a woman's life, even if it's carried to term.
Yes, that's true.
Risks for her health as well as her life.
Before we bring Dr. Abrams into this space, Dr. Gomes, you made mention of the advice that women have been given from in earlier times, such as jumping to make sure your feet, and even from our own culture, the drinking of various bush teas and such. So I was wondering, because Bishop mentioned the fact that we need to have the conversations with our young ones from early.
I did want to support Bishop Gregory on that very, very, very strongly.
Right.
We need to inform our children about sex and sexuality and how to protect themselves and how to make wise choices and how to exercise their power to say no. We absolutely be doing that in a very structured, caring way, and we're not doing that.
Right, because it would educating them in that, so to speak, positive way would not lead them down a path where they may have to go and drink certain bush teas.
Yes. It certainly helps. If you know that you can prevent unwanted pregnancies. It certainly helps you to avoid abortions, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Gomes, and Your Grace. Thank you so much. As we continue the conversation, we now invite Dr. Abrams. Dr. Abrams, are you here?
Yes, let me tell you. All right. I love Carolyn, and Carolyn knows this from a long time ago. But Father Gregory, I just love you so much, and I appreciate you so much. I have so much respect for you, because when Garfield asked me to be a part of this, it was a no-brainer, because any opportunity I get to engage clergy in respectful dialogue, I will do it. And when you talk about abortion and the church, it's hard for me to talk about the church as an entity, because I find the denominations vary so much. And I must confess that I am drawn to the Anglican Church. It's kind of weird. I was christened in the Anglican Church. And I used to go to Anglican Sunday school and missionary, and then I walked away from Christianity for different reasons. So right now I'm a deist, Steve is a supreme being, but I have a lot of affection for the Anglican Church. And it's gone up even more now, having heard what Father Gregory said, because he used a term which is interdisciplinary. And I totally respect that, because I find that some church folk want to exclude other people from the conversation. So I'm grateful for this inclusive conversation. So first of all, I'm sitting in my office now where I see my patients. I have a confession to make. I do not like abortion. I wish abortion would be eradicated from the face of the earth. I don't like it. I don't encourage women to have abortions, but I am strongly and stridently pro-choice. So I am pro-choice, not pro-abortion. And that's something I like to state because sometimes there's a very clear difference. And what it comes down to for me, you know, I must admit, I'm guided by my experience, by research, and by empathy. What it comes down to for me is that I believe a woman has a right to make an informed decision about her own health and her own body. I'm a physician. I'm concerned with health. The World Health Organization's definition of health is physical, mental, and social well-being. I just timing myself. I don't want to be here too long. I have 10 minutes, right? All right. Definition: physical, mental, and social well-being. Some people want to say, well, you know, it's not really her body. It's another body in her body. But it really is about her body because pregnancy does change a woman's body. If you go into a bank and you see a lady in a maternity dress with a big belly, you know that her body has changed. And it does affect, pregnancy has the potential to affect all aspects of a woman's health, her physical, her mental, and her social well-being. So for example, pregnancy can cause physical changes such as, we know about the nausea, we know about that, but some women have vomiting that's so severe that they become dehydrated and have to be admitted to hospital. Some women have severe gastroesophageal reflux. Some people have skin changes. Some women can't sleep properly after a certain time. Some can't breathe properly. And you may think these are minor, but some changes in pregnancy are permanent. So for example, some women develop varicose veins that never go away. Some women develop hemorrhoids that never go away. A large percentage of women who deliver a baby, whether it's vaginally or by cesarean section, have chronic back pain that never goes away. My wife has back pain since she delivered, and it's not going anywhere. Some women have this condition called diastasis of the recti. The recti are the muscles that make up the six-pack. And sometimes these muscles separate and they never go back, and it has to be surgically corrected. Some women have physical problems to the point where they die. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but about over 300,000 women die every year from pregnancy-related complications. What many people may not realize is that when a woman carries a pregnancy to term, she's 14 times more likely to die than if she has a safe abortion in her first trimester. 14 times more likely to die. In my experience, I've seen women die almost everywhere I have worked who have carried pregnancies. I remember at Spanish Town watching a woman bleed to death in the emergency unit right in front of me. At university, I saw a woman who went to term. She had a condition called preeclampsia, where you have this very high blood pressure, and she had seizures, which she called eclampsia. She was extremely swollen, she had seizures, and she died in front of me. Another time at a private hospital, I saw a lady who had an uneventful pregnancy. She went to 9 months, and when she was pushing the baby out, she suddenly collapsed and died. She had a condition called amniotic fluid embolism. It's where the amniotic fluid around the baby enters the bloodstream, goes to the lungs, and you usually die. Pregnancy can affect a woman's mental well-being. We know that in pregnancy, a lot of women become, the short-term memory is affected. We know this. Many women have emotional lability in pregnancy, but sometimes it gets more serious. And develop postpartum depression, which can progress to psychosis, which can progress to being suicidal. Some women get post-traumatic stress disorder after delivery. I had a patient last year who had a very traumatic first delivery. And when it was time for her to deliver this time, she totally freaked out, had a panic attack, had to be sedated. And pregnancy also affects a woman's social well-being. It has a potential to. If a woman is in a happy marriage and she gets pregnant and that's what they both wanted, she and her partner, then that's great. But many women suffer socially from becoming pregnant. For example, some young women get pregnant outside of marriage are kicked out of their homes. Some women are kicked out of the churches when they get pregnant and they're unmarried, or they're punished or humiliated. Some women lose their jobs. Right now, there's a hospital, I did my deliveries at, that's a very religious hospital. And I had 2 patients who were nurses there who got pregnant out of wedlock, and they were called to disciplinary meetings and suspended.
Right.
Pregnancy can also affect a woman's emotional well-being, financial well-being. So yeah, it's a decision about a woman's health, and I believe women should be empowered to make those decisions about their own health. As a matter of fact, I think it's cruel to actually force someone who does not wish to carry a pregnancy to carry it to term. And before I forget, let me define what an abortion is, because I hear people talking about people aborting pregnancies at 9 months. The definition is the termination of a pregnancy before 20 weeks or 500 grams. That's the World Health Organization definition. It's when a pregnancy is terminated before the fetus can survive outside the mother. And it's important to understand that, because I've heard people talking about abortions at 8 months, which really doesn't make any sense. I think there should be an interdisciplinary approach, as Father Gregory said. I can't get away from that word. Thank you very much. And I think there should be honesty on both sides of the divide. Both sides. So for example, sometimes pro-choice people will say, why are you making a big deal about a clump of cells? And that's being disingenuous. Because when a pregnancy is very early, as Dr. Gomes said, there really is a clump of cells. But as the pregnancy progresses and the fetus develops, the fetus will develop body parts and look like a little human, and it's no longer a clump of cells. So we must be honest about that. We must also be honest on the other side of the divide, because many anti-abortion activists or advocates talk about abortion mean killing babies. They're not babies. When you terminate a pregnancy very early, sometimes there's not even a fetus form. Sometimes there's only a sac. As a matter of fact, some pregnancies do not even progress beyond a sac. Some pregnancies never go that far. And I've been at presentations where anti-abortionists will put up videos of these fetuses being torn limb, like the limbs being torn off and the head torn off. I went to med school in '84. I worked at many places. I've seen people do abortions. I've never seen an abortion like that. That is rare for that to happen. So the scare tactics, I think, are unfair. There are some people who like to talk about the regret. I remember an anti-abortion advocate telling me that all women regret having abortions. I told her that was not true. She said, not yet, as if she knew something I didn't. And the research has backed that up. And I remember this clearly because this took place on a radio program on the 14th of May, 2019. Because I started a study on the 15th of May, 2019, where I interviewed every single woman who has come to my office about their reproductive history. And I asked everybody who's had an abortion or abortions if they regret it. And over 80% of women do not. The last lady I asked yesterday said the only regret she had is that she didn't abort it earlier. We must be honest about that. We must be honest about the fact that many people regret having children as well. We must be honest about this rape question, because some people say, well, even if you have a child, you know, if you rape, have the child. And I think that's cruel. It's extremely cruel to force someone to carry a baby born of rape. Some people will cite examples that, oh, well, I know somebody who did it and it worked out, but as Dr. Gomes said, that's her choice. I know a woman who carried a child for her rapist, and the rapist was someone known to her. When the child got older, the child wanted to know who her father was, and the mother relented and let her meet the man, and then he raped her, his grandchild. it doesn't always end well. With respect to these laws about abortion, regarding abortion, again, I think we should have an interdisciplinary approach and be respectful of research, science, data, evidence, and facts. And the evidence shows that draconian anti-abortion laws do not significantly prevent women from having abortions. What they do is they increase the risk of women having unsafe abortions, which can lead to severe morbidity or death. Research has shown that. There's also a disparity when you have these laws that affects women of the lowest socioeconomic class, poor women. Women who are wealthy or of means can always get an abortion done easily and safely. Women who are not, like from the inner city, their options are limited and they are at risk. I think in closing all of this, as I said, I don't like abortion. And I think if we really want to decrease abortion rates, if we're really serious about decreasing abortion, we need to look at the facts and the data. First of all, these draconian laws do not prevent abortion. Secondly, if we want to prevent abortion, we need comprehensive, age-appropriate sex education. We need age-appropriate sex education. Some people don't like to hear that. Some people get queasy at the thought of teaching kids about sex. But the fact is that kids nowadays at primary basic school level all have access to the internet, many of them. And when they see these videos, they learn about sex from the internet. And when they learn about sex from the internet, the concepts of consent, boundaries, respect, intimacy, affection, relationship, love, they're all lost. And they will have sex. And they will get pregnant. And they will be seeking abortions. And finally, we need to have contraceptive methods widely available, especially for young people. So I'm pro-choice, but I'm not pro-abortion. And I think we need to have more nuanced conversations like this, more respectful dialogue, and look at the research and look at the data and have respect for it. Thanks.
All right, Dr. Abrams, thank you so much. An expert really in this field. Yes. There are some things that I want to take from your adding to the conversation to your grace. But before I do that, our social media correspondent, Reverend Garfield, we invite him now into the space to just share what are some of the questions, thoughts, and comments of our viewers. Reverend Garfield?
Thank you, Monique.
Hi, how are you?
Before I am doing quite well. Social media, of course, is busy as usual, both Facebook and YouTube. Mm-hmm. Before I go into that, let me apologize to our viewers for some challenges they have been having re-sound, but it has gotten better for some and some people are still working through. So we thank them for staying while we work it through. I'm really intrigued by this conversation and by all three presenters. There's a comment from YouTube coming from Eldon, who says, this is an age-old discussion. It must be discussed in an objective manner, devoid of emotion. And one of the questions without emotions, because just even by listening, it is a deeply emotional issue, and really it is a very personal issue for many people. So without emotions, and your grace can take that one for us.
Your grace?
I don't know if it's my system.
I think there was a little glitch a while ago. Yes, indeed.
I didn't hear exactly.
Right. Reverend Garfield, could you repeat that question?
Voice Father Garfield, we'll ask your voice on the question. Could you sort of sum it up for me, Monique? Let's see what
I think what he was saying is that the comment, Eldon made a comment to say that this is a conversation, it's an age-old conversation that we are supposed to have at this point, devoid of emotion. I think that's what he was saying. And so he wanted, it's a matter of considering abortion, it's a matter of a personal choice. So he wanted you to, I think, comment on the fact that we are supposed to be discussing this objectively, devoid of all emotion.
Well, I don't know that it's possible to discuss it devoid of emotion. It is such an important human concern that people have strong views on it. But at the same time, the conversation, the interchange must have objectivity as well. But we can express positions on which we feel strongly. It's another thing, and I Dr. Abrams was captured the way in which we deal with persons who differ from us, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, or Dr. Abrams, for example, says he's pro-choice, pro-life, because there are some persons who use pro-life as it means one position, and everybody else is something else. So I think that emotions will be a part of it, because it obviously is a subject, an area of human experience and human life, that we must feel some commitment that will find some expression in emotions. But it must be in the context also of dealing, and I think Dr. Abrams expressed this well, the facts, dealing with the facts around the issue, and not just what we think.
Right, thank you for that. I think before we go back to Father Garfield, Dr. Abrahams made mention of the fact, he noted that denominations vary in their approach to the whole idea of abortion. And then when he spoke about the scare tactics that some advocates use, the regret, and I liked Dr. Abrams that you could come with your own research, so to speak, because you would have managed to come with your own data. Yes, your own data to say over 80% of those women who walked into your office could say no. Do you think that and you indicated that you are pro-choice?
Yes.
You are pro-choice. Yes. So, and well, let me ask, these women would have consciously made the decision, and they made the decision based on their emotional well-being, as you stated, their social, their economic, their mental, not to mention their ability to afford such. Yes.
Yes, it's very interesting, because the reasons vary. I find that most of the women who regretted it were women who the choice was not made for them. Sorry, yes. They did not make the choice. The choice was made for them. They were forced into doing it. So, for example, there were teenagers and their mother took them to have it done.
Right.
Or the partner forced them to do it. I remember one lady telling me that her partner took her to a doctor and said the doctor is going to examine her, and he paid the doctor to do an abortion, and the doctor did it without her consent. Yes, that happened. Somebody else told me that her husband gave her something to drink that made her abort it. And I find regret higher in women who have failed to conceive since the abortion. And the abortion may or may not have had something to do with their infertility. Sometimes women have fertility issues that have nothing to do with the abortion, but women who had abortions who have never had a child and wanted to have a child or want to, those and the ones that were coerced into doing it are the ones who have regret. And regret is everything. I'm not trivializing it.
Yes.
Many people do regret it. It is a fact. But there are many who do not.
Who just don't.
And there are women who have come in my office, this very office, and told me that they regret having children. If they had to live their life again they would not have had kids.
You see,
Monique, can I just say?
Yes, Bishop.
To follow up what Dr. Abraham just said, in my own ministry, I've had, remember one particular case when I was working within the context of the university, of the student who came to see me, and the one concern she had was about an abortion which took place about 3 or 4 years before. And it was in the same kind of circumstance Dr. Abraham just talked about. The parents insisted that she must have the abortion. And she said, I did not want to have that abortion. And they insisted. And I, here at the university, I've remembered, and the guilt feelings I still have, because that was not my choice. But to maintain the respectability of the family, they forced me to do it.
Okay. And, so indeed, we look at the context, and also we're looking now at the age. We would like to bring back Father Garfield into the space. And then when we have heard some of the comments, Reverend Mary, are you still there? We will invite Reverend Mary to join the conversation and share her thoughts. So Father Garfield.
Thank you, Monique.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Michael identified himself as pro-choice. So is Timmy on YouTube, who says 100% safe abortion should be, and then she says, let me not say should be in inverted commas. It is simply a human right. Right. And I am also pro-choice. On the matter of it being a human right, what says Dr. Gomes?
Dr. Gomes?
Yes, I'm here with you, and there is no right to an abortion that is a human right, but there are rights to make your own decisions about yourself. And certainly from my point of view, it is a woman's right to make choices about her body. It is a man's right to make choices about whether he's willing to give his kidney to somebody else who needs a kidney. It's a parent's right to decide that, much as I disagree with it, that in their faith they are not allowed to take blood, and that they will not allow their child to be given blood for the sake of his or her soul. So I agree in people's right to make choices about their own bodies and their own lives.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Dr. Gomes.
Mars Abel Smith says, I'm pro-choice based on circumstances facing mother and fetus. Hard to take one side definitively. Bishop Howard identified himself as being pro-life, Michael as pro-choice. The question here is that when we frame the discussion in the whole issue of whether one is pro-life or pro-choice, and one has to take one of those camps, do we find that sometimes with the lack of understanding of some of the nuances of those terms, why Michael said he is pro-choice and
Bishop says he's pro-life.
Howard says he's pro-life. Do you think that by and large, the average person tuning into the conversation miss some of those nuances? And is it helpful to frame a discussion around abortion in those terms, saying that, and then people feeling that they must be in one camp or the other? Or is it a way of framing it based on what Mars Abel Smith says? Pro-choice based on the circumstances facing mother or fetus, but he's not definitely a pro-choice or a pro-lifer. Is there not a kind of a middle ground based on circumstances? And any member of the panel can take this on. And if Reverend Mary wants to come in and take it on, that's fine too.
Okay, great.
When I talk about pro-life, I am not just talking about the fetus. I am taking a stand in which I take seriously the life of those involved, particularly in those situations where a decision has to be taken I was talking earlier on that, particularly in the situation of where the mother's life is at risk, but also again what we are seeing happening with our young girls, where there is, as it were, if you talk about the body almost as a temple, the desecration of those bodies of those girls, because there is a sense in which the body is not just a kind of thing, a sac in which a fetus develops. It is a human body in which Dr. Abrams talked about this sort of physical connection and development. There is also an emotional connection that normally takes place with this developing fetus. To have somebody whose body as a child, 13, not fully developed to go through all of the things that Dr. Abrams talked about, but emotionally to be going through all of those changes too. And decision has to be made. My pro-life consideration is as much the life of that child as the fetus. And that informs the decision may have to be made in that situation. So it's not just a fetus, it is the value of the life of that human being who has been desecrated by whatever violent or abuse has taken place in the life of the person.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Gomes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I understand the framing of that question. And I really understand that sometimes it's used to divide us into two different camps. And that but I think that this conversation is particularly rich in nuance.
Yes.
And in understanding. And human life is at its best and at its worst, full of nuance and should be cause for empathy and understanding and a middle meeting where the two positions of being pro-choice and pro-life can actually coexist.
Right. I do agree with you, Dr. Gomes. All right. Father Garfield, we're just going to ask Reverend Mary to come into the space. And if there are any other comments and questions, then we can take those a little later on.
Yes, good.
All right. Reverend Mary, welcome to the conversation. A lot has been said.
And you know, it is a necessary conversation. And
Really?
I believe that most of us welcome this kind of honesty, yes, so that we ourselves, and I am speaking on behalf of not only Mary Graham, but 10 young adults that met to really flesh out their thoughts on this much needed topic. Mm-hmm. And to hear about the interdisciplinary conversation. That is so necessary, because when they talked about hearing, when did you first hear about abortion? And it was in the skills class at high school or a college course. And they said, but we have been never educated by the church. Yes. And in the church, we are the church. There are qualified persons who can come together and, as Dr. Abraham said, I think it's Dr. Abraham, formulate a comprehensive, age-appropriate sex education. Because, as they said, and I believe, there is silence. And the silence must end if we are to grow women, men who can make informed decisions about their health. When asked, how has the church informed you on abortion? There was silence. They don't know. Sometimes people just randomly take verses of scripture to knock persons over their heads and make them feel less about themselves. Yes, it is an emotive subject. Yes, but this silence is not always about taboo. It is about not knowing what to say. This is what I believe. You see, the avoidance, the silence, the shaming that women live stem from the fact, somebody was saying something, stem from the fact that there is no intentional education. Yes, a woman has a right to make an informed decision about her health, but how can she make an informed decision when culturally she has been told it must be books and no boys, that even in the dictionary books come before boys. And so you concentrate on the books. You go to university, you concentrate again. Nothing is talked about the sexual nature, healthy relationships, etc. And when you come back, the community asks, when are you getting married? How do we make such a jump from books, concentrate on that, forget about the boys, to when are we getting married?
Wow.
When dealing with the comfort level about discussing abortion, young adults, male as well as female, speak about being uncomfortable, about shame, about being reserved because they're not sure how they will be judged. We, the church, is the community where from even 4 years old, we need to educate. Oops, sorry, I must have hit something. We need to educate our children. Sex is not wrong. Sex can be beautiful. The other sex is not someone to be shunned. You know, I was really educated when the young males, when asked what is your perspective about abortion, they said, you know, in relationships we have little input because the decision is either made by the girl or by the parents, and we have no place where we can address our emotional distress. And this often results in depression, suffering, and engaging in at-risk behaviors, drinking, drugs, promiscuity.
Sorry, Reverend Mary, this is from the boys' perspective?
The male perspective.
The male perspective.
The young male.
The
young male perspective. Where is the safe place? Both sexes ask, where is the safe place where we can be invited to discuss all we are internalizing without feeling judged, without feeling that we are of no value because we have these questions raging within us.
All right. Wow. Are you finished for the time? You've paused on Reverend Mary?
For the time being.
Okay. That there was really a pause for effect. But thank you very much for bringing into the space. I heard Dr. Abrams saying, So I know he may be agreeing with some of the points that you would have raised. And there was an interesting point that she raised about the male perspective, because when we discuss abortion, when we talk about abortion, we generally focus on the female, because it is the female who is the center of everything. You know, the female is the center of everything.
But it takes the male as well as the female.
Those males who would be particularly interested and want to be a part of the decision, right? Is that right?
Absolutely. Can't work without the two. Except in very special circumstances.
True.
Okay. Okay. But Reverend Mary, you made mention of the church and the silence that exists, right? Because young adults have the conversation. Well, they want the conversation. There is a need for the conversation, not just only young adults, but children in general who want to know where babies come from. If they see a baby, if it's christening Sunday and they see the baby being presented, I mean, when they ask, where do babies come from? Mommy, how did she get the baby? You know, how does mommy respond to the question? How does even daddy respond to the question? And so that comfort level that you made mention of needs to be established in church, that comfort level that will facilitate the ability to create the safe space to talk about it. And so we bring in, this is where I think and Dr. Abrams and Your Grace can share. I believe that this is where the interdisciplinary conversation, this is one of the safe spaces that the interdisciplinary conversation can start, where it can start, because we want to be able to answer the questions within, while they're asked within the church, because sometimes when they go outside, the responses that they get may very well lead them down the wrong path. Right? Your Grace?
Part of the confusion that exists even within the wider society is I suppose the media thing, which says the church has this position against what have you. And I know, I look at it and I say, which church are talking about? Because many of those they are quoting they don't represent most of us.
Yes.
There is a sense in which, yes, there's a diversity of positions, but it is true that we need to make more use of the opportunities that we have, or the various settings that we have to participate more fully in this kind of education. Of course, you run up against parents and you have to respect some of the boundaries that parents set, because there are some parents who are not comfortable or feel that they are the ones, although they're not necessarily doing it or don't necessarily know how to answer. As you raise the question, where do babies come from? I can see, Daddy, where do babies come from? Go ask your mother. Because you're not comfortable with it, so you go ask mommy and what have you. But I think that we can do more in that regard. And because you see, with the abortion issue, we're sort of addressing something which has, after it has happened, when there is much more that we can do to prevent people reaching that situation. and to handle the situation. And I know Dr. Abrams used the term informed, in more informed ways, if they have that kind of preparation along the way, and which I think that we can do more as church. I know that within church these days, and certainly that's a part of it, they're talking more about safe spaces.
Yes.
Church.
Right.
We have an Anglican worldwide commission on that. And we have a representative from Jamaica who is on that and who will be participating in the promotion within the Caribbean, certainly within the province of the West Indies and in our own diocese, of promoting safe spaces, which have to do with several things, but certainly the kind of violation and the kinds of situation that could lead to abortion is one of those things that would be covered in that program.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that, Your Grace. I think Father Garfield is ready to share some more comments. Father Garfield?
Well, yes, thank you, Monique. A lot of people echoing the sentiments that Bishop Gregory just articulated, and also concurring with Reverend Mary in her sentiments. Karen Da Silva on YouTube says, the silence must end, especially in the church. The conversation needs to be had. It needs to be ongoing. Karen Williams on Facebook says she's loving the discussion and it is long overdue. Sean of Major Campbell, that is my colleague and friend Sean, says, I am pro-choice and pro-life. He's both. And Byron Blake on YouTube says, positing and taking side often leads to campaigning and the denial of objectivity in the particular case and situation. Abortion, by definition, is individual, not group. And then he goes on to say, the group or community aspect arises at the stage of seeking to affect the environment. How do you create an environment in which unwanted pregnancies can be reduced? Diana on YouTube, agreeing with Reverend Mary that usually the males don't get a say. Is there a place for them? Alison Cook on YouTube says it's a very interesting discussion thus far, but can we talk about giving back women the right to make a decision about her body and her life? Quite educated women, no, not girls, women can make an informed decision to terminate a pregnancy and should be allowed to do so. Those are some of the comments coming. And Nika, I think, finds herself in a place where a lot of people find themselves. She says she's a doctor and a Christian, and she remains deeply conflicted about cases of incest. You know, there are lots of people, and I'm happy of how nuanced the discussion has been, because there are lots of people who don't feel that they're either just pro-life or pro-choice. But based on how, especially how Dr. Gomes began, people want to deal with the issue situationally, and a number of people feel that the law should make room for people to deal with this issue of abortion situationally. Your Grace, how do Christians who are scientists and doctors and who want to think rationally and have some reservations, where do they find themselves, either you or Reverend Mary, as the clerics?
The last article I published in the Jamaica Observer set out what I presented as the Anglican way, the via media. The reality is that life doesn't come in terms of this right or that wrong. We have to engage and make judgments and decisions. Hopefully they are informed decisions. We also have to deal with our conscience in arriving at these positions. And therefore, I don't think that there is anything inherently wrong in persons finding themselves in those situations. I believe it is in those situations you make responsible decisions. When you weigh the issues and when you continue to struggle, the reality is that in making a decision could be wrong. That is part of being rational and responsible as well.
Okay.
One of the things that a lot of people are really saying that this discussion is long overdue, conversations like these. How do we find space and place to continue a conversation like this? The multidisciplinary kind of a conversation, the nuanced kind of a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Is this one for your grace as well, Garfield? Because
it's right. Anybody who wishes
to I was about to say, yes. I would love to hear your grace, but also because Dr. Abrams really jumped on that. He really jumped on it and he liked it. So I would love to hear his response as well. So your grace, and then Dr. Abrams.
Oh, well, I mean, this is one platform. I believe that there are other. I know, for example, a place like Church of the Ascension has these sort of forum situations from time to time, and it is probably something we don't necessarily have to go to every congregation, but in this age of online platforms as we are doing now, perhaps we can use some of these situations where you have a panel, an interdisciplinary panel that can raise up those issues. Also, some of the groups within our church, the auxiliaries within our congregation, should be able to sponsor things, and they don't need to be in every congregation. Some of these things can be deanery activities, so that we want to think about what we do when we meet. I mean, we're in the pandemic period now, but when we meet for deanery days, do we talk about the same old topics all the time, or do we engage topics of this nature and bring together the kind of professional expertise that to address issues of this nature?
Thank you very much for that, Your Grace. From the cleric perspective, Dr. Abrams, what say you?
I think I agree with everything he had said. I just wanted to raise another issue if I can.
Mm-hmm. Go right ahead.
In terms of denominations in this country, where does the Anglican Church fall in terms of numbers of congregants, members of the denomination?
Your Grace?
It's difficult to say because if you're looking alongside the others, because there's some people who talk about Pentecostal or the Seventh-day Adventists are clearly the largest number at the moment, but you have a number of split groups among the mainline congregations. Probably Baptists, because they are a sort of broad group, would be the mainline tradition. We would fall probably next in line, and Roman Catholics and Methodists and others would be sort of smaller. Historically, we would have been occupied a larger space. Yeah. But the newer churches now is where a lot of the attention is, and where I suppose there's the attraction and all the other things that go along with some of the newer churches that are springing up that don't necessarily, and you have right now a context in which a lot of so-called churches are sort of personal ministries. They have no judicatory authority to which they're answerable. For example, that famous one yesterday in the paper with the violation of the regulations governing the COVID, you would see congregations like that be probably somebody's ministry.
Right.
Connected, and have a structure to which we are answerable.
I was asking that question because, there's strength in numbers, and, when people talk about the church, as I had said recently, it's not a unified group.
No.
And I find from my discussion with Anglicans, they usually are much more rational. So for example, with the Catholic Church, they have a basically zero tolerance approach to this. I remember watching a program where a senior Catholic priest had spread some misinformation that if a woman is raped and she goes to the emergency room, everything can be flushed out and she'll be okay, which is not true. I remember conversing with a fundamentalist, I forget which denomination it was, and I simply identified myself as pro-choice. And I was called a serpent and a viper and a child of the devil, a child of Satan, a Satanist. So, you have these denominations where there's a zero tolerance. Mm-hmm. And when you meet among your peers, the thing is, how can persons like yourself influence your peers to be more rational? Because, churches in Jamaica have a lot of influence. How can you influence them to be more rational?
Well, perhaps there's room for this type of dialogue to be interdenominational.
Yes.
Yes.
And that then adds another element of multidisciplinary to the conversation.
I think that would be quite in order. Yes, to add another dynamic element to the whole issue of the interdisciplinary, just the different perspectives and how it is that we guide our congregants irrespective of the denominations. At this, yes, go ahead, Dr. Gomes.
No, I was just going to say, as a pediatrician, sex ed starts from very, very early. And our responses to how our children deal with their body parts, how they explore them, how they learn about them, what we say about them, how we treat their exploration, which has absolutely no headspace in it except exploration of their own body.
Right.
Is really, really critical. And that's also part of one of the things we need to learn as parents, how not to be judgmental about a baby. And as a baby learns its eyes, its ears, its nose, it also learns its hands, its feet, its toes.
The penis, yes, the vagina.
The vagina, vulva.
The sexual orientation becomes, it becomes apparent and important.
It's understanding that that's your body. And it doesn't a 1-year-old have sexual feelings, but it's the same way when you caress your skin, it feels nice, or your mommy rubs your back. It's the same connotation of your understanding of your body, and we have to not be condemnatory and ridiculous about it.
Okay,
as early as that.
As early as that. Thank you so much, Dr. Gomes. All right. We invite Father Garfield to come in now with some final comments before we go into asking our panelists to share their final thoughts. Father Garfield, are there any wrapping up comments coming in from social media?
Well, there are lots of comments coming in on social media. I'll just read some of them. We don't have time to get into all of them.
Okay, thank you.
Sandra Touslin says, what if parents object to the church starting conversations about abortion? Perhaps seminars through schools, guidance, counselors, library discussion, and so on. Barrett Blake, adding to that, says, this is not a subject which we can handle in a discussion, in inverted commas, or even a series of discussion. One needs to create a culture for these types of discussion, and they need not all be structured or formal. Dana Nell says, I am curious as to I'm curious as to what say, if any, should the father of the child or fetus have? And okay, they're having their discussion running on. We can, but people have a lot of comment. But I think what Karen Blake says is also important. I'm having a telephone conversation with Dr. Abrams the other day. And, one of the things that struck me is that we often don't have a lot of conversations, or our conversations are not often filled with empathy and a sense of trying to hear and listen to each other. It is often filled with trying to prove our own point and get our side going and so on and so forth. And trying to get people to adhere to our positions. And I think creating a kind of a culture, which takes a lot of time and a lot of work, is something that really is needed in our society. And we can start that, as His Grace pointed out, in small groups, not always in the big fora that we have from time. Yes. And so creating that kind of a culture, I think, is important. There's much more. Finally, Reverend Sean says that, Major Campbell, the bishop's writings, that is, Bishop Gregory's writings on the matter should be recommended reading. Bishop, that should be recommended reading. I know you have published them in the papers and so on and so forth, but are they available if your clergy wants them to share?
Yes,
you can
be made available.
Thank you. And great. That's it from social media for tonight, Monique.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Father Garfield. And we thank you to our viewers for having a robust conversation going on YouTube as well as Facebook, and for sharing your comments and your questions. We now invite our panelists to share their final comments just to wrap up again. And so we will start with Your Grace.
Well, for me, it's been a pleasure to be a part of this panel, to be with public figures, Dr. Gomes, Dr. Abrams. We encountered Dr. Abrams in so many different facets.
So many affairs, yes.
When he's not a doctor doing other things, but I'm aware of your writings, Reverend Mary. And I think what we are probably modeling is what we're talking about in terms of the interdisciplinary approach and how we can foster that in our various spheres, because I think there's no fundamental disagreement among us as to the importance of that. The other thing I would say that perhaps in getting persons to understand the issues, we also need to put the abortion issue in the broader context, because I think what we're saying in terms of the education of persons getting early in life, so it becomes a part of the whole development of the person, dealing with issues of sexuality, dealing with self, the valuing of self, the rights of the individual, that it be put in that broader context. And I would again remind us that there is no single position that the church, as is portrayed in the media, adopts. And I believe that our church, one of the things about Anglicanism is that the faith affirms the divine presence, the divine reason being present in all creation from the very beginning, and manifests the divine presence in the mind, so that in all of the things that the scientific community can do, the different disciplines, but also in relation to the conscience, driving us in terms of some of our moral and faith commitments. There is no inherent conflict for us between the science and the religion and the morality, that they all are part of this divine reason which informs the creation. So this kind of discussion is something which is very much a part of how we understand ourselves as Anglicans, and which we can bring to the table.
Yes, we thank you kindly for that, Your Grace. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, Reverend Mary, I'm going to ask you to step in this space and share your final thoughts.
I go back to a very important part in our confession that we don't see in other confessions. We have not loved ourselves as we ought. And for me, that underpins quite a lot, especially in our Caribbean context. This too embraces what Dr. Gomes was saying, that from early on, toddlers are taught that their bodies are not to be loved. Our bodies are not to be embraced. And so there is the fracture there. Dealing with women who may have been referred for probably a bad attitude on the job, not being able to smile, and just providing a safe space where that person can pour their hearts out when they discover that confidences will not be, for a better word, shared. When they discover that this is a trusted space, one can see that woman moving from not being able to look in the eyes, that woman being bent, to when realizing that no matter what, I am worthy of love. I am loved, and therefore I can love myself. Seeing the posture, the confidence that woman portrays herself, despite it may have been incest, it may have been rape, it may have been abuse of one kind or the other, speaks of the compassion, the empathy, the love of God that the church is called to share with those who are hurt, wounded, and in need. And I end there.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for that, Reverend Mary. We invite Dr. Gomes to share your final thoughts on the conversation on the topic.
You couldn't send me after Reverend Mary. Lord. What more is there to say except thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the gift of listening. Thank you for the gift of your listeners. Thank you for us being able to share different viewpoints, different ways of approaching a problem, and to leave uplifted.
Thank you. Right. And also, you know, some of the very salient points that you are leaving us with in terms of, you know, what we consider our context, the legality and the morality of it. Thank you for putting all of that in the space. All right. Dr. Abrams, final thoughts on the matter, pro-life and pro-choice.
This is a heavy one. I feel like I need to go home and just chill out. Mary, I love you. I just love you. I love your energy. I feel it all the way over here. I feel it. I feel it. I'm just grateful to be a part of this conversation. And as Father Gregory said, you know, it should be interdisciplinary, that word. And I think decisions going forward should be guided by research and facts and evidence and data and by empathy. I saw a lot of empathy here today, a whole heap, lots of empathy. And I think we need to understand more about human behavior, really understand what drives people to do things. And as I leave here, there's something I'd recommend everybody here watch. And it's a TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, a doctor of Jamaican parentage. And it's on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Adverse childhood experiences, because adverse childhood experiences affect our lives. And many of these women you see having abortions, many of them are survivors of abuse, of neglect, of dysfunction. And when you denigrate these women, call them murderers, and you insult them, it just makes it worse. And this is how the church can help. The church can help by reaching out and showing empathy. They need empathy, not judgment. And I find there's way too much judgment coming from some church folk. So I really welcome this forum. I just love you guys. You want to go back to church now. Tell everybody I said that.
All the doors.
This is on tape, Michael.
Open, yes.
I really feel like I want to go back to church. I love you guys. Thank you very much.
All the doors are open and 30 people. So remember, you can't squeeze in one, you can jump in another.
Yeah, I love you guys.
What's
Thank
the
you
name
very
of
much.
that person again, please, Dr. Abraham?
Oh, Nadine Burke Harris.
Okay.
A landmark study. When I heard about, she came and did a talk in Jamaica and it changed my life.
Okay.
It's a lot of us, a lot of weird things. A lot of us are unwell mentally and physically. It goes back to childhood.
Okay, so we will definitely tune into that TED Talk. Thanks for that, Dr. Abrams. And so to our viewers, we say thanks to our panelists, and we say thank you to you too, our viewers, for coming in and joining us in this our 7th conversation talking about the church and abortion. Our Bible study series will continue with Father Khan, and we continue to look at baptism, the gateway, baptism as the gateway to communion. So we invite you to join us for the coming Bible study sessions. We also invite you to share with us your thoughts and ideas on topics that you would like us to discuss in our conversations. We welcome that all the time because we do value your input. And so once again, I just want to remind you of the objectives of Conversations Around the Diocese. It is to provide a forum for pertinent conversation, also to help people to navigate a world from a theologically and scripturally sound perspective, and also to equip people to pray aright. And so as we close, we ask Reverend Mary to just say a word of prayer.
I almost forgot that.
All right.
Gracious God, you are the God of all times and all seasons. You are ever present in our sufferings. And we thank you for this conversation this night. Indeed, you have guided us. You have enlightened us. And we pray that as you guide us forward, that we will be more loving. We will listen more. And we will embrace your people, your hurting people that you place in our midst. Bless each member of this panel, the producers, and continue, Heavenly Father, to enable us to educate your children. These mercies we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, our example. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much for that, Reverend Mary. And so once again, we say thank you for coming and joining us in this conversation. And we say thanks to our team, our tech team, Mr. Andrew Hutchinson, who was our Zoom meeting host, to Father Garfield Campbell, who was our social media correspondent, and to our executive producer, Father Kurt Brown. For this evening, I was your host, Monique Castle. And until our next conversation, do be safe, be blessed. And remember, there's always a choice.